Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Everyday Consent. We're back with another really fun consent chat with my good friend Chelsea. So Chelsea, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I am not in any relationships right now, and I identify as gray asexual.
Are there any communities that you're a part of that you think have given you a unique relationship to consent?
I mean, I think that the asexual community is sort of like an ephemeral thing. It exists mostly on the internet. You don't exactly like, there's not an asexual pride parade, at least not where I live, and like non-participation or quasi-participation in a social activity doesn't exactly signal like, it's not like a huge red flag. You don't exactly go up to people and be like, are you asexual? I mean, it's harder to find.
Sure.
So, but that being said, in my experiences in the asexual community online, I think that they have a really healthy dialogue about consent because it's really important when you're asexual to be able to say no to things that you don't want to be doing and do that really bravely, because a lot of times people assume that if you're making out, then it's okay to like put a hand here, and you really need to be like explicit beforehand, because that can be tough for a lot of people to go through for whatever reason. And so I think that the asexual community has come around together a lot around helping each other find ways to consent to the things they do want to do and really draw like hard lines where they don't want to and be comfortable with that. Asexuality is like really a whole range. Like
It's very broad. So.
Gray asexual means like sometimes I'm interested in having sex with people, sometimes I'm not. Generally less than other people, but I think that, like I said, most people are
on the spectrum.
On the spectrum, and so just the label helps me. And so I think that though it's really important because a lot of people who are asexual, like they're interested in doing things that they consider romantic, like hugging or cuddling and kissing, but maybe not holding hands, or maybe kissing but not cuddling, and it's really, or they're interested in doing some sexual things but not other sexual things. So having really explicit and like basically they, you know, you help each other with scripts to help bring your partners in on to be really explicit so they know what you're cool with from the get-go, because it's, you know, it's
would you say that you find yourself explaining what asexuality is to your partners a lot? And
yes. Okay. I mean, or rather I end up explaining what asexuality is to my partners quite a lot, and then they're not really my partners anymore. Like you kind of learn by being asexual how many people view sex as like an integral part of any relationship, and so I tend to be pretty upfront with people early on that I'm asexual. I think that there have been times when it's easier to just like stop things by just not like choosing to end that relationship if I'm not seeing someone not really respecting boundaries. Like it's not something a lot of people know about or understand or respect, to be honest. They're like, a lot of people tend to explain away sexuality as temporary or as not that serious or something that can be overcome with the right partner, which may be true for some people, but like that's a pretty
people say that about being gay a lot too.
It's a pretty rude assumption to make. When you identify as asexual, you have to be really comfortable with these scripts and really comfortable with people walking away from you after that, which is pretty, you know, telling of somebody. It's probably a good thing if you find that out early on, but yeah, when I'm in relationships, the thing is that I'm not completely asexual, and most of the time when I feel really close to someone, then I may be comfortable with having sex with them. But yeah, I've never hooked up with anybody. Like that's not a thing that's ever happened, and I tend to, you know, like the scripts that I use tend to be scripts to like ease people who I might be flirting with or who seem to be like trying to make something happen on a more like, you know, one-night stand basis, sort of ease them into the reality of like, maybe we can do some things, but we're probably not going to sleep together.
Right.
So, and that tends to be where most of those encounters end. So that's the script that I use the most, I think, is the, hi, yes, I can see you're very interested in me. Thank you for the drink. I like you too, but would you be cool with just like the cuddling and the making out and maybe not other things? And that tends not to, you know, it tends to essentially stop most of those encounters. Not always, but most.
Yeah, that's interesting. On a different vein, would you mind going into a little bit the difference or relationship between aromantic and asexual?
Yeah, aromantic, it's not something that I know as much about because it's not a community I'm like as much a part of. Aromantic means someone who doesn't experience or doesn't want to get involved in romantic acts. And I think that's kind of where you start to get to the really fuzzy line between sexual and romantic, because is cuddling sexual or romantic? Is kissing sexual or romantic? It's like romantic can be in a whole lot of things that might look like friendship to some people. But I think that, aromanticism is something I'm interested in, and interested in meeting more people who identify as aromantic, because, I'm interested in hearing about how they define aromantic.
Sure.
But that's the general definition. I don't know. And oftentimes, it's actually a little bit more rare, I think, for asexuality and aromanticism to go in hand. Like, people tend to be one or the other. Like, an asexual aromantic person would only ever be friends with people, hypothetically, like in the strictest definition of the word. And I don't think I've ever met anybody like that. But yeah, that's the difference.
But just to clarify, you can be asexual without being aromantic, and you can be aromantic without being asexual.
Yeah, typically.
Have you found that there are different ways that consent works for you in different kinds of relationships?
Yeah, I think that consent works a lot better in my relationships with women. I choose the label gray asexual because it fits the most with me. But before I identified as pansexual, and I think in my relationships with women and actually transgender men, the consent has been a lot better, just because I think that there's it's because it's not a relationship. I think that we rely a lot on scripts to understand and navigate our sexual relationships, and what consent looks like, and what's sexy, and how we should be communicating with each other. And I think that when you're in a relationship that isn't as portrayed in the mainstream as being one way, it's easier to break outside of those scripts.
Because you're already outside.
Because you're already outside of the script. So you get to make up your own rules a little bit more when you're navigating a relationship where, for some reason, the bodies or the norms or the histories or the sexualities are different than the sort of vanilla heterosexual relationships portrayed in, I think, most relationships that we're exposed to kind of tend to be that way. So
would you say it's a nice opportunity to, because that door is already open?
Yeah, definitely. It's a nice opportunity to get out of the
headspace of I have to be normal.
Yeah, I guess that's the benefit of being abnormal is that you get to break out of this abnormal. You get to break out of the scripts a little bit more. You get to make up your own rules. You get to decide what consent looks like for you. And I think communication can be a lot easier because there isn't that same script to fall back to. So you gotta figure out how this is gonna go down. Yeah. And what people are okay with, and what areas are erogenous for them, and what they don't want you to touch. And I think that works a lot better. And that's something you should be doing in every single relationship, but it's more of a norm in relationships which aren't, sort of falling back up. Aren't the pizza guy rings the doorbell.
Sure. And would you say that extends to what we were talking about earlier, when you do tell partners pretty quickly that you are Grace, and many of them leave at that point, but the ones that stick around, do you think that the fact that you started off on that foot has improved things? It's
you weed out people pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You immediately read it. It's part of the reason why I started sticking to the label, is because you weed out pretty quickly the people who aren't comfortable with communication, and who may not be comfortable with barriers of consent, or have a certain idea of how sexual encounters are supposed to go down, and so and what sexuality is. So I think that in most of the relationships I have entered, especially since I started using that identity, it's definitely already set up a good standard of consent and communication, because I've been straightforward about the fact that we are going to have to communicate.
Right.
So.
Yeah. That makes sense. Can you think of any times that you have had problems with consent that you would like to share?
Yeah, so the reason I am so emphatic about the verbal and nonverbal combination of verbal and nonverbal cues in my definition of consent is because in one of my earlier sexual encounters, I was with someone and I verbally consented, before anything started, and then it started going pretty badly for me, and this person just sort of barreled right through my nonverbal cues, and I was kind of terrified, so I shut up And I couldn't use my words, but I tried to use things other than my words. And in the current definition of consent that I think is really popular, everything that happened was fine. But for me, it wasn't fine.
But clearly it wasn't.
I wasn't fine for a while. And so, and I think that was pretty early on. I didn't really understand for quite some time that what happened wasn't okay and wasn't consensual, but it wasn't. And so I think that is why, like, you've got to be checking in all the time. One yes is not enough. You've got to be checking nonverbal cues. Like, don't ignore someone if they're, like,
If they're really quiet.
If they're really quiet, like if someone is quiet, that's a bad sign.
Really quiet and really stiff are actually like,
yeah.
Really two things. Because it is just a fact that when you are in a very anxious state, one of the common reactions is shutting down. Like it's just a physiological thing that happens, and it is something that's talked a lot about when survivors are trying to process through what happened, because they shut down, and it's very different from them being able to say no.
Yeah, so you gotta make sure. Yeah. I mean, like, unless this person, you've already had a conversation with this person in which they said, oh yeah, by the way, I just like to lie there like a dead fish when I'm having sex, FYI, then it's a little unusual if someone isn't responding, or it isn't, like, if you're having good consensual sex, everything will be, like, it'll be pretty clear what is going well and what isn't. And I think that, I mean, again, there are sort of, like, something I keep on talking about, because I think that this is ultimately the reason why this happened, is scripts of sexual encounters, and like how people...
They're flawed, they're extremely flawed.
And they're really flawed, and I think that it is really need to rewrite the script to include checking in all the time, to include really enthusiastic physical and non-physical and verbal consent. And I think that if anyone isn't on board with that script, then we need to get them on board. Yeah. Like, that is sexy. Consent is very sexy, especially like if you're with someone who's like, oh well, I don't really want to ask you how you're doing. Like, that's not hot.
You're like, actually that'd be great. Could you do that?
Yes. It's very hot. And and the reasons why I think we're scared to do that is because I think we're, especially for women, like there's a lot of fear about taking control of your own sexual agency, and like, and not being sexy if you're like asking him to do something for you. And so I think that, we really need to work on those scripts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea. That was really interesting. So if you have any follow-up questions for Chelsea, you can say them down in the comments or email me, and I'll pass them along to see if she wants to respond. If you liked this and you want to see more videos like this, please press like, and let us know down in the comments what you did like or didn't like, maybe. And if you want to see more videos from me, then hit subscribe. Happy consenting, folks, and I'll see you next week.